Hi, everyone. It's Hillary Topper here, and you've signed into We Are Triathletes webinar. And today we're going to learn all about the bike and about power meters. And Colin Cook is going to be showing us the whole thing about power meters and bikes. And I'm just going to introduce you, Colin, and get right to it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Hillary. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And that's not what we wanted here. One sec. Here we go. All right, so we'll get right down to it. So I've had a tendency of going a little bit over on my slides here, my presentation. I'm going to do my best today to stick it to 30 minutes here. But we are going to focus on power meters and primarily on the bike, but we're actually going to talk about how they could help you with swimming and running as well here. So let's dive right into it here. So here we go. So really quickly, just about Peak Triathlon Coaching. So we've been around since 2010. We're all about, multi-sport coaching for age groupers, by age groupers. So all of our coaches, race and train as age groups themselves. So they really understand what it's like and, respect that there is more important, or there is more things to life than just triathlon, and making sure that we're keeping a good balance in life and really making the training and the journey as fun as possible along the way here. About me, so I am a Ironman certified coach, USAT level 1 coach, as well as a youth and junior coach, certified race official. And then from a racing perspective, I'm a 12-time finisher, Ironman finisher. I've done Kona 4 times, many half Ironmans, and had some success across the way there. And then certainly my most proud accomplishment is the 4 children you see over there on the side. So I have 4 kids, 5 and under. So living the dream, trying to continue to train and do everything while raising our 3 boys and the girl there. So, all right. So I'm going to start off with a little quote here, and this is actually pretty old now, but back before power meters were really kind of, they're still, not everybody has one by any means, but they're a lot more common. But Joe Friel, he's actually the author of the Triathlete's Bible, if people are familiar with that, and he's definitely a well-established coach in the triathlon community and so forth. And so I'll just read this real quick. It says, using a power meter in Ironman triathlon is almost like cheating. While others are trying to gauge intensity through a cloudy vein of emotion, which most makes perceived exertion and even heart rate nearly useless, the athlete with a power meter is focused on a number that, if maintained with only slight variations, will produce an optimal bike split. All right, so not trying to promote cheating or anyways. Obviously, this is 100% legal, but it just gives you a perspective of how much value, a lot of people put on the power meter. And I thought that would be a kind of a good way to kick things off here. So before we dive into it, how about we talk a little bit about what a power meter is? And forgive me, this will be the last slide that has a bunch of text on it. But basically, it's an electronic device, right, that measures power. But it's ultimately the torque that the athlete is generating, primarily again on the bike, but also during their swim stroke or their pedal stroke or even their run stride. So what it's doing there is it's through the different types. It's basically giving you a measurement in an accurate way and in a real time way to see what your exertion level is in the form of watts. All right. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going, but at its simplest form there, it's basically, it's showing you, and it's another form of an output from our effort that is displayed in wattage. And if anybody has any questions at any time, feel free to jump in here. But for the types of power meters, so I wanted to just quickly highlight, this is called a VASA swim ergometer. And so this is a tool I actually have that does have a built-in power meter. So currently the only way, not a way that I'm aware of anyways, to measure your power while you're swimming. I'm sure they're working on that somewhere, but at least for training and things like that, this is a really cool tool that we'll talk about a little bit more, but just wanted to make sure people are aware that that option's out there. And then we've got all kinds of different power meters and things like that we can use on the bike. And we'll spend most of the time, talking about these different options and trying to help you hopefully figure out what is the best option for you if you want to move forward with a power meter. And then we'll also talk about the new run power meters that are available that definitely have some value and are starting to pick up some traction as well here. All right, so the benefits of power meters, as Joe Friel kind of mentioned there in his quote there, but it really helps eliminate a lot of the guesswork. So there's a lot of issues around, a lot of people use heart rate or perceived rate of exertion and things like that to track or gauge their effort levels. And I'll start this by saying that, understanding those things and looking at those kind of metrics are extremely important, I think are extremely valuable. But when you can get real-time feedback like a power meter can provide, it can be really, really helpful. The example I like to use there is let's say you were to do a 15-second all-out effort, all right? If you were to look at the data afterwards, if you had a power meter, heart rate monitor, and your perceived rate of exertion, as you start to ramp up, and ultimately when you're using power, you're gonna instantly be able to see what your effort level is. And, especially if you were trying to be consistent for that 15 seconds, you're going to be able to see that and maintain that throughout the entire interval there. Whereas with heart rate, you're going to see your heart rate slowly climb, or actually probably relatively quickly, but it's going to climb as the interval persists. And then really, if you've done the interval correctly, your maximum heart rate should be a few seconds, 1 to 2 seconds after you finish the interval. And then as you go to recover from that interval, then you're going to have a delay, and your heart rate's slowly going to creep back down, but it's not going to give you that real instant feedback like the power meter will, where again you'll be able to see your effort level, and then boom, if you drop off at the end, it will drop off and display that. So that's really where it can be extremely valuable, and kind of goes into the biggest piece of where I see these two here are the most important to me, but for race pacing. So especially when it comes to long course triathlon, half Ironman and Ironmans, being able to pace yourself sufficiently is extremely important, right? And I'm sure people have been in races where they've seen somebody, fly by them at the beginning of the race, and then, you go 20 miles down the road or towards the end of the race, and, they're hunched over really slowly and just kind of in total survival mode because they went out way too hard. I would suspect that those are people that aren't using a power meter or not using it properly. So, what it can do is really at the beginning of the race, and in most cases, it can really kind of help tone you back, especially when you first get out on the bike, the adrenaline's probably going, you're really excited to be out there, and you're probably going a lot harder than you feel like you are, and you're tapered, you're feeling fresh, and ultimately you probably, if you continue like that, you're going to crash and burn, and you're going to, end up significantly slowing down and not being able to maintain your effort. And the same thing goes with your heart rate. So if you're basing your strategy based on heart rate, let's just say, your goal is to keep it under 150 beats per minute for the entire bike portion. Then, if you go out and you jump right up to 150, your speed's probably going to be faster at that point than it is later on in the race, because as you fatigue, your heart rate's naturally going to want to rise, and it's going to take a higher heart rate to maintain the same effort level and so forth. So you're probably again going to slow down, or you're going to push yourself a little bit too much at the beginning if you're going purely off of heart rate. So again, don't want to devalue those at all. If you recognize that your heart rate is much higher than it normally is when you're in a power zone or something like that, or you don't want to hold yourself back in training and things based on those. So it's important to look at the other metrics, but if you stick to power, it can really be helpful. So, I gave that quick example on the 15-second interval which, is helpful in structured training. So, hopefully a lot of people are training and doing different intervals and things like that during their time. And, they have some structure that they're using with it. And it's going to be really, really helpful for you to be able to nail down exactly your effort levels during that training and so forth. All right. It's definitely a helpful way to be able to track your fitness more accurately. We're going to talk about your functional threshold power in a few here, but basically, you can be able to establish what your FTP is, your functional threshold power, and then hopefully you see that continue to rise and get higher, and that's an indicator that you've improved your fitness level and so forth. So it's a great way that works a little bit better than if we're using heart rate and lactate threshold and things. Those may move a little bit, but may not necessarily be indicators that your fitness levels are improving. Definitely also can be a really good motivator. If you have a certain number, especially in training, that you're trying to chase or hold, that can really help to push you during your training and so forth, or during a race as well. And then I'm a bit biased here, but certainly the communication with your coach is significantly improved when you can be able to provide them with a power file, because really, I'm a data junkie, but as much data, the more data you can get, the more helpful it is often to most coaches, or certainly for myself. And you'll be able to see, or they'll be able to look at your training and be able to see what you're doing and how they may need to deviate your training based on that. I'm going to show you a couple things we can do with some tests that can help to give you some indicators on what you may need to work on with training as well. All right, so real quick on the VASA ergometer here. So you can see the display there in the middle, but basically, show the time, distance you've covered, what pace you're swimming at, your stroke rate or your rates per minute. And then it also has your watts down in the bottom right there. So again, it's a really neat tool where, it's nice. You don't have to drive to the pool. You can have it right at your house or whatnot. And there's actually some pools that have them at their facility that is helpful as well. But, you can do some testing or, time trials and things like that to figure out what your threshold power may be for your swimming. And then you can base that or use that to then, do some specific training and things based on that wattage and so forth here. So that is how you can take advantage of power while you're swimming. So when it comes to power meters on the bike, there's quite a few different options out there these days. Back even, 7-8 years ago, there was really two, I'd say, different types of power meters out there. There's a company called SRM, which is still considered to be, one of, if not the gold standard of power meters that is spindle based or crank based there. And then you had the PowerTap hub based, so that one up in the top right there, and so that's going inside the hub of the wheel. So those were pretty much the only two options out there. And they both work very well, but it's great. There's been all kinds of different companies that have joined the market here and really have helped to drive the prices down and make power, much more economical and different options, based on what your needs are and things like that. So we mentioned the spindle based, so that's sitting there right inside the in the crank there. Is another option. Sorry, the spindle there would be inside, if you're looking at the picture on the left there, sitting right in between your gears there in the front. So there's a little piece that they've added that will be able to ultimately look at your crank as it's going through and that torque again to be able to give you an output there. But then we do have pedal-based options now. There's a couple different options out there. Garmin and their Vectors are the most common ones here. And those are definitely a great option. The only kind of can be negative of that is that you have to have that look style. So those are the ones down in the bottom there. The look style cleats or shoes that you have to use. They don't support SPDs or speed plays and things like that. So you're limited a little bit there. But for, road riding and triathlon, definitely a very good option there. There is also over on the right, the picture to not all the way to the right, but the power pod there in the bottom. That is called a power pod, which is actually an opposing force power meter. And so this is a newer option out there, and it's the most economical. But what it does, it basically looks at the resistance that you're going up against. So the opposing force, which includes the wind and so forth. And it'll actually calculate what your wattage or your effort level is there. So there's definitely some can be some inefficiencies with that or inaccuracies. However, there's been quite a few of the analysts and things that have done some tests on that and been able to really show that they're pretty darn accurate considering how they're measuring the output and things, and with how economical they are, they very well could be the best option to get into power meters and so forth. But there is also options for the bottom bracket. So that's basically, if you're looking over at the bike here, down in the inside the spindle there, you can basically have the power meter added there. We talked about the hub, and then the chain rings, kind of very similar to the crank there, and the spindle, where it's sitting on the just off the crank there to be able to see that. And one thing you'll also need, I put a picture of a Garmin here, so you will have to have some kind of device or head unit that's going to be able to display your power. I definitely recommend and prefer people have a Garmin Edge or some kind of actual bike head unit. You can use your Forerunner, triathlon watch, or your Garmin, or whatever device you're using there. The problem with that, though, is you typically have your watch on your wrist, and so it's relatively small, so you can't see as much. Whereas if you have a bike specific computer, you can put it right on your top tube or somewhere up around in your up in the top near your bars and so forth, to be able to see that a lot easier there. So I have seen people take like a second Forerunner or something like that and use that as a bike computer. That's not a bad option, but you are going to need something to display it to make it valuable to you. All right. And then as we switch over to run power options, so there's really two out there. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the RPM squared is the name of the insoles over here on the left image there. These are a really cool idea. So you can actually put these in the soles of your running shoes or actually in your bike shoes, and be able to technically get power. A power meter out of for both disciplines, but there's definitely been some challenges around that one. I actually do have a set of these that I bought a few years ago, and never really successfully got them going, to be honest, unfortunately. But it does seem like they're still around, and I'm not sure what kind of improvements they've made over the last couple of years. But that is technically and was the first run power meter option out there. Since then, they have added, or Stride is the name of the company that's developed this pod here. They used to have a heart rate strap kind of look where it determined your power, but put this right on the laces or on the laces of your shoes, and is a great way to be able to display your run power there. The one option I did not add in here that's also pretty interesting is if you have a Garmin Forerunner, I believe it's the 935 XT, and I think maybe one of their higher end running only options, and then you have their run specific or their triathlon specific heart rate monitor. It can actually do power for free, or included in that. That's something they just recently added in the last few months, and it definitely seems to work a little bit differently, than the Stride does, but is a great option. And if you already have one of those devices, is certainly the most economical way to start running with power. we haven't talked too much about using power yet here, but one challenge I do kind of have with run power meters is the fact that when you're cycling, you're able to shift gears, and that's how you're going to be able to change your effort level. And obviously we can run slower or faster, but it's missing kind of a key component there to not be able to just shift your gear. It's relying on you to address that pace a little bit differently. So, but there's a lot of really compelling arguments, and some people running very successfully based on power now. So it's certainly something worth looking into. All right. So let's say you do decide to purchase a power meter. What do you do with it once you have it? All right. So you want to find out what your FTP is. And so I did mention it a little bit earlier, but what the heck does FTP stand for? And so that stands for functional threshold power. And what that is basically if you were to do a test where you went, or you went out and rode, let's say, let's talk to bike, based on the bike for now, absolutely all out for 1 hour. Let's say you produce 200 watts for, you average 200 watts, I should say, for that 1 hour, then that means your FTP, or your functional threshold, would be 200. All right. So because it's extremely painful and challenging to do a 1 hour test, there's definitely some other ways. I'm going to talk about that in a second, of how you can test it and kind of calculate it differently. But that's what's talked about when people say, we're talking about FTP, or what their functional threshold power is. So how do I know what that is? We do a test here. Okay, so there's like I mentioned, there's definitely a few different protocols around, and different ways you can do it. But this is the protocol that my clients will follow, and or most of my clients. I do have some that like to do different tests, and I'm open to other options. But basically, we do like a 20-minute warm up. So sorry, the apostrophes will mean minutes. We want to make sure we get a few kind of stronger efforts in there to get the blood flowing, the heart rate going, maybe a little sweat, and then we take it for 5 minutes easy, and then we go into a 3-minute all-out effort. All right, so this is ignore the fact that this actually is not the end of the test here. You're going to have to keep going after this, but you want to see what you can do for all out for 3 minutes. And one note I do have on here is to recommend making it if you're doing this with your watch, or your Garmin, or your Edge, to make each one of the intervals in here a separate workout, just so it's very clear with the data. You don't have any discrepancies there. So once you've done the 3-minute all-out effort, then you switch over and you ride very easy for 15 to 20 minutes. So little typo there. Sorry, it should be no more than 20 minutes of easy spinning. But you do want to make sure you get a sufficient break and a rest before you get into the 20-minute all-out effort. So just like with the 3 minutes, we're going to go all out. Obviously, it's going to be at a lower power output, but you're going to try and give it everything you've got for 20 minutes. Okay, and then we definitely want to make sure we sufficiently cool down after that. But if you look at that there, that is the protocol that I have most of my clients do when they're we're trying to figure out, or benchmarking their FTP. Okay, so what does that give us here? That gives us here, this is an FTP sheet here, a critical power worksheet, as I refer to it as here. But this is basically a document where we record, what the effort levels were. So this is an example of one of my clients here, where, so here's his 20-minute average power. So he did 307 watts for that 20 minutes, and then did 379 watts for the 3 minutes. Okay. I do have some heart rate data over here and some cadence as well. The weight of the athlete. And then, we're looking at the results and the joules and things, which aren't really relevant these days. There's kind of some dated metrics there, but they remain in the sheet here. And then we see down at the bottom here, basically what it calculates or prorates your FTP, or your functional threshold, would be for if you were to do that 1 hour test. So we're going to round this up to 300 and call this person's FTP 300. Okay. So then from there, I have set up all the different zones. So I work in a 7-zone system, or we work in a 7-zone system with our athletes here. So a lot of times we'll refer to, okay, you know, you're going to warm up in zone 1, like I was mentioning in the power test there. So basically you'd be riding between 149 and 164 watts during that time. And when you step it up to zone 2, you're between these ranges and so forth here. So it gives you a gauge and can tell you specifically what wattages and things you're going to want to work in during those specific intervals when you know, your coach supplies those to you or whatever you're following along with. Also put in some different effort levels. So this would certainly be customized and modified for actual races with our clients, but gives you an idea of what a ballpark effort level may be, you know, for a sprint race, an Olympic race, half Ironman and an Ironman, you know, what kind of wattages we'd probably be looking for. And then one thing I did overlook here, but this weight per kilogram is a really important metric as well. Ultimately, you know, because everybody weighs different amounts, they're all different shapes and sizes. You know, what it comes down to ultimately is, you know, how much weight, you know, watts per weight you can put out there to be able to, you know, improve on that. And basically, as you hopefully raise that FTP, and if you can keep your weight the same, then you know, your watts per kilogram is going to go up and so forth there. So a lot of information there. Let anybody let me know if they'd like a copy of this to be able to calculate this themselves. But that's what we do with our clients. And then what I should talk about here as well real quickly is, so we've got a reasonable gap between these two numbers here. You know, what can happen sometimes if you've got somebody that's very anaerobic, so they have a big engine, I like to say, and they're very strong. You know, they may have, let's say, you know, 400 watts here, or even 500 watts. And then when they do the 20-minute test, that's really low, like let's say 200 or 250 watts. So it means there's a very big gap between their maximum power for the 3 minutes and the 20-minute power. That means that we need to work on bringing that lower number up and kind of improving their endurance, because it seems to be that they're lacking a little bit more in that, and that we need to try and close that gap a little bit. As opposed to the opposite, and certainly happens a lot more often than the first option there when it comes to endurance athletes, is, you know, they go out and their 3-minute effort is, let's say, 325, 330 watts, and their 20-minute effort is, you know, 310 watts, and they're very close together. So what that means is they're very strong aerobically, but they really need to work on trying to maximize that speed and that building that engine up higher, so that we can hopefully bring both of these numbers up as you continue to grow there. So that's you know, really valuable information that then goes in, you know, certainly from a coaching perspective, to be able to help to make sure we're building training and things that make sense for the athlete here. All right, so, and of course I'm going a little bit slower than I had hoped here. It's taken me a little bit longer, but let's go ahead and take a quick look. So I'm going to jump off to my Final Surge account here. And since Maine was yesterday, I did not race this year, but I did race last year. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my power file from Maine 70.3 last year. You know, here's some basic information. You know, your Garmin's going to give you that, you know, the distance, the speed, the moving time, you know, the elevation gain and things. But then here now is where we start to get into some of the power metrics here. So we can see that my average power was 285 watts. Max was almost 800 watts. But the weighted power, which is like your average power when you take out the time that you weren't spinning, that was 289 watts. So when then my max 30-second power was 414 watts. So what that basically means here, and if we look at that variability number, it's at 1.01. This is a really good indicator of how consistent ultimately the rider was. And for the record, this is a relatively flat course, so it was a little bit easier to do. And not to toot my own horn here, I guess, but I was very consistent during the ride. And what can happen here is if we see this variability go really high, that often can make it very challenging.
Right, oh,
We got somebody? Question? No? Okay. Um, so we can see that we've got a low variability here. But if there was, let's say, my average power was 250 and my weighted power was 300, so it was a big fluctuation between those, then that would mean that there was a lot of surges and I wasn't nearly as consistent. And then this number would be higher, probably at that range, probably be 1.04, 1.05, which isn't horrible. It's when you get up into the definitely 1.05 and higher is oftentimes where we can see it can really negatively impact your run. And then this is intensity, is basically just based off your FTP, your functional threshold power, what intensity you're riding at. So basically 83% of my functional threshold power. And then we can see my cadence was 94 max there. And then we see some heart rate data there as well. Since we're already at 2, I'm gonna hold off. We could also go in. I'll just quickly click on this, but we can go into an advanced analysis here, and some neat things we can do with this when it comes up here, where we can drill in and let's say we want to just look at the power information. You can come in here, and this is more just cool things you can do with Final Surge. But maybe I'm interested in looking at this little segment here. Boom, I can drop that down and I can see what my power was there. And one thing I really like to do is look at the first half of people's rides versus the second half and some different things with those surges and so forth. So that's certainly a lot of really valuable data and things that, hopefully your coaches and so forth are looking at as they go into it here. All right, so that's a very, very quick data review. But let's talk a real quick about the cost of power meters. So the Vasa Swimmer Gomerty is about $800. I actually got mine used quite a few years ago now, and I think I ended up getting mine for a little under $1,000. But there's definitely they're not the cheapest thing out there, but they are a great tool. There's quite a range here, as you can see, between for the bike power meters. So the Power Pod that I mentioned there, that's is listed at $199 these days. And SRM actually brought their price down recently, I think, but about $2,500 for the most expensive one. So certainly not given away, but they do work very well. And then, as I mentioned, the 935 XT, that's included there, and the Stride is $199. So a little bit more economical there with the run options. So I'm going to quickly give you my recommendations here. So for the price sensitive athlete, I'd recommend the Stages is a really good option. There's also it's called 4i, so 4i that have very, very similar price points. And so these are crank based options here, crank arm I should say, options. I'm a really big fan of the Stages one. I may have 3 or 4 of those for my other bikes and things like that. So I like to ride with power on all my bikes. So I have this on all but my racing triathlon bike. So that's, bang for your buck. You really can't do much better than that, assuming that you want to make sure that something that's relatively accurate. One thing I will say about the Stages is the power is actually only in one crank. They do have now options where you can get it in both, but they're actually more than double the price. But what it does is basically it just doubles your power and can really, I found them to be quite accurate. So that's a really good option. The other one, and I spelled this wrong, but the Garmin Vectors are another great option that we talked a little bit, which are the pedal-based, and they provide tons of great data. And they're very easy to switch between bikes if you have a road bike and a triathlon bike or something like that. And depending on the same thing, if you want to get the single-sided or double-sided, they range between roughly $600 to $1,000. Okay. So it shifted, I guess, a little bit quickly there, but those are some things to think about as you're getting into it. Hopefully, I've shown you a little bit about the value and what would bring to the table to help you with your training and your racing and so forth. But if you do need help with your racing, either myself or I do have 8 assistant coaches that work that Peak Triathlon Coaching. We'd be more than happy to all these guys and gals ride with power and We don't require power, but we highly recommend and encourage it for our athletes and really see the value there. So, yeah, that's it. Still managed to go over. I'm sorry about that. But does anybody have any questions or anything?
Okay, I'm going to unmute.
Okay.
I have a question.
Hit me.
So I'm like new to triathlon training for the most part, but I've been working out like my whole life. So, and I noticed my bike split is like awful, especially in comparison to the run.
Okay.
Now I don't really bike a lot, but for me as someone who's worked out my whole life, it's odd for it to feel like it's so bad. I'm wondering, do you think, and I know it's tough to tell just by a conversation, but is it like, do I need to get a tri bike? Could it be the bike fitting? Like what order would you go in improving the?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd probably do is I would ask you a little bit about your training. So, I mean, certainly you did say you don't bike much. So, I mean, if you're serious about getting better at biking, I would, and much is a relative term. So I guess it really depends how often you're biking. But when you are biking, are you just going out and riding, at a steady state all the time? Or like, what do you do with your riding typically?
No, I mean, I train with the Runner's Edge guys, and they're pretty intense, but I can't really keep up with them per se.
Okay.
But for the run, I can keep up with them fine. For the bike, it's like anywhere from 2 to 6 hours per week, I would say, on the bike.
Okay.
So not a lot, but nothing either, right?
No, definitely not. No, should be sufficient. I mean, again, I guess depends on what you're training for and so forth. But and when you say you go out with those guys, so they do a group ride?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be probably some good training if you could hang on to them, if you're properly, riding in a pace line, right, where you're getting your chance to go out in front and really hopefully kind of laying down the hammer there, and then you're slowly backing down and getting back into the line. But, if you're kind of getting dropped from them pretty quickly and then it ends up just being a steady state ride for you, you're probably missing out on being able to get some of the intensity. Right. So, I mean, in general, the training, if we're going to ride or swim, bike and run all at the same pace, that's probably where we're going to end up staying. Right. What we need to do is we need to exert ourselves and kind of just go up a little bit above that point for certain amounts of times, and then drop down below it and keep, trying to raise that bar. Right.
Okay.
So, certainly I would strongly recommend, if you're serious about getting better on the bike, is, get yourself a power meter, establish what your FTP is, and then, start doing some training. And, if you do another test, right, and if you're whatever you did, if you're not seeing any gains from it, then it looks like you need to try and attack it from a different angle and try some different things in training to keep raising that power level.
Okay, got it. So you would say that it's less about the bike than it is about the person.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, no doubt, you mentioned some great things there. I mean, certainly the bike itself it can be important. The bike fit is very important. But I would start with your training. I would suspect there's some things that you could do there that could make you definitely get faster.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, I mean, I have actually a lot of questions, but I'll just focus in on one. So the FTP, right?
Yeah.
First of all, I've never seen a chart like that before. That was amazing. I'm really impressed and blown away. Can you do that FTP test indoors, or does it have to be outdoors?
Great question. Yeah, sorry, I meant to cover that actually. So you can do it both. And I actually have most of my clients do it both ways, depending on where we are in the season. So especially as East Coasters here, when we're spending a good amount of time on our trainer during the winter, and a lot of people actually, they find that they can't quite seem to get the same amount of power indoors as they can outdoors. So it's important to kind of test where you're primarily training or racing, right? So, at the beginning of what's going to be what I've called the out season, or your off season in the winter when you're on the trainer most of the time, then that's a good time to do an indoor bike test. And then, hopefully once the weather gets nice, you can get a test in outdoors and see, compare the two and so forth. But I would do both.
Can I ask a question about that?
Of course.
Yeah, I did a FTP test over the winter, like 2x8 minutes and also 15 minutes. And my indoor wattage was something in the range of 135.
Okay.
Outdoors, I haven't done an actual FTP test, but once this summer, I did 3 5K time trials
Okay.
on one, and I was easily holding 165 over
Yeah.
that range.
Right.
So that's a big difference between indoor and outdoor. So I don't know what
Absolutely.
exactly it means and what I should be targeting.
Well, yeah. So, a couple of variables could be going to that. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, so you're obviously, when you're on the trainer, you're totally sustained, and, you're riding at the same incline and everything, all in a very consistent environment there. Whereas some people can actually take advantage. And I don't know what those, the time trial courses look like, if they're rolling at all or anything like that. You're obviously, if you got to get up the hills, that's going to force you to increase your power and things like that. But that's a perfect example that, it's very common for people to be able to put out more power when they're outdoors than they are when they're indoors.
So what do you use as a number? If I'm then told to go out and ride at 85%, is that using my indoor number or my outdoor number?
So I would use your outdoor number for sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Colin, if we want to coach, what do we do?
So if you're interested in talking to us more, we actually have a form on our website. So you basically just inquire, and then it'll send you this questionnaire that we have you fill out, and then we set up a time where I typically do the initial consultations, and we talk for 45 minutes to an hour or something, and see if it makes sense, and understand if it's a good fit. I'm very honest. I've told people a few times that I think you're doing pretty well on your own, and it may not be worth your money and so forth. But for those people that I see a lot of room for improvement, based on what they're doing for training and things like that, then we could certainly talk about different options and moving forward and so forth.
Okay. And last question I had is, what's the significance of cooling down?
That's a good question. That actually depends on who you talk to. There is actually more and more research coming out that the cool down isn't necessarily as important as it once was stressed. But ultimately, I do think, you want to get that core temperature down. If anything from, if you go finish your workout and you instantly go jump in the shower and you haven't allowed yourself to cool down yet, you're going to get out of the shower and you're just going to start sweating again. So just from a perspective there, I think there's some value to it, but it is good to be able to get your heart rate down. And there's also some benefits to kind of working and seeing what, again, going back to power, once you're cooling down and once you get into that kind of relaxed mode there, what kind of power you generate. And that can also be an indicator that there's some growth or improvement on the, that's happened and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to think that, like, my generic Cannondale that I bought a few years ago, I can't perform high end with if I get the other stuff down pat, right?
It's all about that engine. You're the engine.
Okay, cool.
So definitely, I mean, it's got to be, assuming you were, reasonably fit for it, so it's the right size for you and everything like that. Absolutely. I mean, will you get some benefit from a triathlon bike? A bike that's going to put you in a more aerodynamic position, for sure. But if
that's not the difference maker, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Great questions.
So anybody else before we end? All right, then, Colin, we have your information on the screen. That was totally brilliant. I'm so blown away. And I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask you on the side.
All right, no problem. Happy to help out at all. Like I said, I love the power and the data and things like that. So fire away with the questions.
So Colin, peak tri coaching and then go to what?
So here, I'll just show you real quick here if I can. So if you go to Peak Tri Coaching, and then if you actually go under the Services tab.
Okay.
And then if you do a Get Started here, either one of these buttons here. Maybe I have a flaw in my site. There we go. Geez, I'm gonna have to fix that. But yes, if you click that one on the right, I guess it starts to go through this web form here, and it gets all the info and everything.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
This
cool.
is great. Thank you. Thank you,
All right,
guys.
guys. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.